Clerk.
Government Business Orders Day number 1, Marriage Amendment Bill number 2, 2012, resumption of second reading debate.
Senator Hanson-Young, do you wish to seek the call? Senator Hanson-Young.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President. I rise today to speak to the Marriage Equality Bill that is before us. This is, of course, the second Marriage Equality Bill that I've spoken on in as many in the past month, in fact. This is, of course, an issue that people are extremely passionate about in our Australian community, and it is something that here in this place we've taken quite some time to catch up with those out in the streets, around dinner tables at home, and friends, family, work colleagues who have all across the country become far more passionate about this in the last decade. We know that other countries around the world have taken this step to remove the current discrimination in the Marriage Act, in their marriage acts, the willingness to remove that discrimination and to allow the institution of marriage to become inclusive, not exclusive, allowing same-sex couples the ability to have their love celebrated and their relationships accepted, understood and respected under the laws of their countries. Catholic Spain, Belgium, Canada, various states in the United States. We know recently, of course, the celebrations on the streets of New York, when New York allowed same-sex marriage and moved for marriage equality. We also know that political leaders throughout the world have also changed with their views on this particular issue, and we know that we've had Barack Obama, the President in the United States, who, despite being staunchly opposed in recent years to marriage equality, has now changed his view and has become a key supporter. Because, as he puts it, when his daughters asked him why such discrimination would exist and what difference it made to allow same-sex couples same rights as everybody else, he found it difficult to try and explain that type of prejudice, that type of discrimination to his own children. And that, Mr Acting Deputy President, is reminiscent of the change that many of us have seen, not just in relation to political leaders, but also, of course, in relation to the way the general community has learnt that the time has come to remove discrimination, to allow equality and to push ahead for this important reform. Here in this place, of course, we've had many debates about this particular issue. In 2009, in this place, we debated my marriage equality bill for the first time. And when that bill was finally put to a vote, it was only the 5 Green senators sitting right here in these seats that voted for that piece of legislation. I think it is important for us to reflect on just how far we've come since then, to now see 4 bills for marriage equality across both houses, with a real willingness, passion and push from many people from all sides wanting to see this reform happen. We know that too there are reforms happening in the states and the territories across Australia, because people are becoming sick and tired of waiting for the inevitable. Believe that Julia Gillard and Tony Abbott, despite their own personal views, remain steadfast in blocking true reform from happening. Tony Abbott, of course, is not letting his members on this side have a free vote on this issue, and I think that that is shameful. I'd like to think that we could have this debate today, and when this bill finally comes to a vote, that every person in this House has the opportunity to vote for what they know is right. And if that is indeed to remove this discrimination, people should have the opportunity to do that. I read again in the papers this morning that it doesn't look as though Tony Abbott is going to change his mind. He's going to keep his troops well and truly in their place. But so too, Mr Deputy President, I am concerned with the lack of leadership shown by Julia Gillard on this front. Because despite the continual insistence that she doesn't support marriage equality, she can never quite explain why. We'll hear today, throughout this debate and in the coming days, members in this place who will stand up and speak very passionately against removing this discrimination. And they will base it on their long-held views of tradition and their religious convictions around marriage equality. I tend to disagree with their position, but I can understand the footing by which they come from. Our own Prime Minister, however, is not able to articulate her opposition to this issue. And it is, Mr Acting Deputy President, I think, disappointing to see the leader of our country not being able to take this issue by two hands and drive the reform forward. And I believe that because of that, Mr Acting Deputy President, Julia Gillard, like Tony Abbott, is standing in the way of this reform from happening. But it is inevitable. It will happen. The changes are inevitable. There are many, many Australians who want to see marriage equality become a reality. They want to see this discrimination removed. They don't want us to be left back in the dark ages where we thought just because somebody was homosexual, they deserved to be treated as second-class citizens. This is modern Australia. This is 2012, and it is time for us to be able to rid our statute books of this type of discrimination. I spoke several weeks ago when I spoke on the marriage equality bill that's currently before this place in my name, about how the institution of marriage should be embraced as an institution that is important, not just to the state but to our communities, that we understand the universal language of marriage and love, and that we should be allowing this institution to be inclusive, not exclusive. And I spoke about how the institution, our understanding of it, has changed over time. Back in the 1950s, before we had a Federal Marriage Act, each of the states were responsible for governing the laws of the institution of marriage. And within some states, there was active discrimination against people being able to marry because of their race. We had some states who had to sign off on the marriage between an Aboriginal man and a white woman, or an Aboriginal woman and a non-Aboriginal man. The institution was discriminatory based on whether somebody was indeed Aboriginal. And when, in this federal parliament, we decided to enact a Federal Marriage Act, there was a big debate over how one of the best things about having a Federal Marriage Act would be that it would overcome the discrimination that was embedded in some of the state jurisdictions on this issue. And that even during the Menzies government, when the Federal Marriage Act was established, Menzies himself said that that type of discrimination had no place in what would become the new laws governing marriage and the institution of love. And I think that was a pretty noble act, to remove that discrimination and to accept that if two people love each other, then no one else should have the right to say no simply because of who those people were. And so we got rid of that discrimination and we moved on, and we thought that was a fabulous and wonderful thing to do. Except that, of course, this discrimination that currently exists remains there, and it's time that we did something about it. Marriage has changed as an institution over time, as our understanding as a community, as a people, as governments, as elected representatives has changed. Back in the 1950s, we thought it was wrong to discriminate against people because of their race, and it was. And it is wrong today, as it was wrong back then, to continue to discriminate against a couple simply because of their sexuality. And that is the point that so many Australians believe so dearly in, that this institution is important. People should have the right to choose whether they want to be married or not. But it should not be the law itself that discriminates simply because it's always been that way. I see here some opponents speaking about why they strongly believe the Marriage Act shouldn't be amended and that marriage equality should simply be brushed aside. And they talk of not wanting to change the institution of marriage. It can't be changed, it has always been like this, and whether we like it or not, that discrimination exists and it will continue to exist. Well, Mr. Deputy President, I put to you that as society accepts that things must change, as we become wiser about the decisions we make in not discriminating against people based on race, gender, ethnicity, sexuality, that the laws that govern our country must change as well. Thankfully, the majority of Australians agree, across all sectors, from the city, the suburbs, the bush, the regions. There is an overwhelming feeling that if people want to get married, who cares whether they're straight or gay? I say that, Mr. Deputy President, remembering a T-shirt that I saw in a rural town that I was visiting during the election in 2010, rural Victoria. And there was a young guy, and he was wearing a T-shirt that said, "Some dudes love dudes, get over it." And I thought, you know what? Well said. It's true, Mr. Deputy President. There are gay couples, lesbian couples in our community living in committed, loving, long-term relationships. They're couples who have got families. They're somebody's daughter or son, sister, brother, niece, nephew. They could also be somebody's mother or father. And these people deserve the same rights as everybody else. If they wish to get married, they should be able to. The strongest support in this place that I have seen from marriage equality advocates over the last 3 years in particular have come overwhelmingly from the parents of gay and lesbian Australians. Organisations like PFLAG, Parents and Friends of Gays and Lesbians, have done a sterling job at bringing forward this issue into the light of the public realm, but right here in this place, the number of doors they have knocked on of parliamentarians in this place has been phenomenal. And they do it because they love their sons and their daughters. And they want their now adult children to be accepted as equal, to see their relationships equally recognised. And if they want if their son or daughter wants to be able to marry the person that they love, they're going to commit the rest of their life to, these parents believe they should. Why should parliamentarians in this place have the right to say no just because of the argument that this is the way the law has always been? It's a really hollow comeback. It's not a significant argument against why we would move to enable marriage and the institution of marriage to be more inclusive. One of the other reasons, of course, that we hear from opponents on this issue is in relation to religious freedom. And that's why, after the Marriage Equality Bill 2010, which is what was subject to a debate here in this place only a couple of weeks ago, went through an extensive Senate inquiry. The most submissions ever received in a Senate inquiry was received into this piece of legislation. And people believe that this is an important issue to debate. They want our parliamentarians to be talking about it. And it became very clear that while religious organisations already have the ability to make a decision about who they want to marry in their churches or by their particular celebrants and who they don't, they wanted it to be even clearer. And that's why this piece of legislation that's currently before us makes it very clear. No one is forcing anyone to be married or to marry somebody else or to oversee a marriage. It is all about removing the restrictions that say that people can't, if indeed they want to. It's an interesting point to make on that issue, Mr. Deputy President, that actually the majority of weddings in Australia are indeed conducted by civil celebrants. Over 60% of Australian marriages are. People already make a choice about what type of ceremony, what type of celebrant, what type of wedding and marriage they are going to have. Those choices are there for both celebrants, religious organisations and couples who are entering into that important institution. As I've said several times here in this place, there is growing support in the Australian community for marriage equality, and it is only going to continue to grow. I hope this legislation does pass in this place, but I fear, Mr. Deputy President, that until there is true leadership from the political leaders of both the Labor Party and the Coalition, that it won't. The issue is not going to go away. The issue is going to continue to grow. In New York, when the legislation there finally passed last year, and there was celebrations in the streets that marriage equality was finally happening, that vote on that piece of legislation did not finally get through until the third try. The issue didn't go away, it kept coming back. And by the time political representatives and leaders in their parliament accepted that the change was inevitable and the tide could not be stopped. It was then, on the third time, that the legislation passed. And I believe, Mr Deputy President, that that is what will happen here too. This is important reform. Australians believe in it. It is part of our nature to give people a fair go and to not get hung up on the differences between us, but to focus on the things that we all believe in dearly. And if this means
Order.
extending the
Senator
institution of
Hanson-Young,
marriage,
your time has
we
expired.
should.